Good afternoon. My name is Cherise Stokes, and I'm the Executive Director of Tech MGM. And I'd like to welcome you to our Leveraging Data for Economic Development webinar series. Today is week 4 of our series and is presented by MITRE. Over the last 3 weeks, we've had an opportunity to hear from tool providers, government entities, and also community leaders and hackers to discuss how we use data to leverage our economy. This week, we're very fortunate to have a long-standing DoD partner, MITRE, that will enlighten us on strategies to further drive innovation within government organizations. Please welcome to our Tech MGM audience, Deb Zides, Christina Rhylander, and Dan Ward of MITRE.
Thank you very much, Cherise. On behalf of the MITRE team, just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to present to this forum. And to those who are participating, we're looking to make this a conversation, if you will. I don't know about you, but there's nothing worse than death by PowerPoint and then ending a meeting and walking out saying, I wish I had had a chance to engage with the speakers for a change. So our goal today is to use the slides that we'll step through as a facilitation opportunity. So please feel free to ask questions and we'll address those as we get to different points along the way. So again, thank you. Happy to be here. So today we'd like to have a conversation on innovation and the Department of Defense. For those who have been involved in DoD or heard the stories for decades, it's been about red tape and very challenging for innovators, vendors, non-traditional vendors explicitly to be able to engage and bring new capability to the Department of Defense. The bureaucracy just wasn't enabling that opportunity. So things have been changing. A lot of great language has come out of Congress to kind of remove some of the barriers, and this is the time. So if you're looking to bring innovation to the federal government, the DoD is really leaning in and trying to make some of those changes. So that's what we would like to talk about today. Before we go into the slides, I'd just like to introduce ourselves so you know who is on the line. Deb Zides, currently at MITRE. I've been here just about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was a program manager in the Air Force and retired Air Force officer. So my background is working on weapon systems and fielding at the speed of need. And Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Dan Ward here. I've been at MITRE for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, like Debbie, I spent 20 years on active duty in the Air Force as an engineer and program manager and military technologist, specializing in rapid innovation. In between hanging up my combat boots and coming over to MITRE, I spent about 2 years as an independent author, speaker, and consultant, primarily working in the area of helping people to understand and apply the principles and practices of rapid innovation. So over to Christina.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christina Rhylander, and I have been with MITRE for about 3 months now. I came over to MITRE from working about 20 years as a program manager, as a civil service employee, some of that also a contractor for both the Air Force and the Navy. My last several years, I guess I'd say, in serving in the DoD as a civil service was really about trying to find those new and innovative ways to get through those sticky problems.
Thanks, Christina. Yep. Thanks, Dan. So the purpose of today's presentation is, like I mentioned earlier, a discussion on how the Department of Defense incorporates innovation into acquisition activities. So first, we'd like to set the stage, let you know a little bit about MITRE Corporation, what we are and what we aren't, especially for the industry partners who are attending this. We're not in competition. MITRE runs federally funded research development centers for the government. So we're here on behalf of the taxpayer to try and help bring these new ideas, this new innovation in. We'll talk about defining innovation and culture. That's one of the challenges, is that, buzzwords all over. Innovation, culture, what does that really mean? How can we get on that same page to understand those? And then from there, we'll give the example. We'll have the conversation about how innovation is coming into the Department of Defense. We'll talk about some of the statutes that are allowing some of these new pathways to acquisition. And from there, talk about some tools. We'll show you some tools that are available to help teams with innovation, trying to figure out, how do you focus your requirements? How do you determine stakeholders? How do you focus and get your priorities? And so that is capability that is actually outside the MITRE firewall. So what we show, you'll be able to use and take back to your organizations. And then finally, we'd like to just open the floor if anyone has any discussions, any specific questions. We'd love to help. And we are not above going live to the internet and doing Google searches or pulling up some of the websites. So we're here to help the team that's on the line. So a little bit about MITRE's unique vantage point. That top left box basically talks to the fact that MITRE runs these federally funded R&D centers. And what does that mean? What is an FFRDC? We hear it all the time. We hear about these different companies that have these FFRDCs. What it means is that an organization, a company, we're not in the business of building F-35s or ships. We are about the public interest and bridging and bringing the technology and making it better capability on behalf of the taxpayer. That also means that it's conflict free. So it's not like we're trying to find out what an organization or an industry partner or startup is doing and say, that's great, let's steal that tech and do it ourselves. No, there's zero conflict. We have a sustained workforce. There are about 8,500 employees in MITRE all over the country. Our main location, our main campus is in the DC area, as well as Boston, but we're also LA, Colorado, a lot of different places in the country. And MITRE also has the special accesses, so we do have a lot of the clearances needed. Below is the example of the 7 FFRDCs that MITRE does run. So you can see on the far left, we're involved in the Department of Defense, our National Security Engineering Center, FFRDC. We also support the FAA, the IRS, the VA, Homeland Security, DOJ, Health and Human Services, which is actually a very interesting conversation right now. MITRE is co-partners for the industry academic COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition with over 900 partners. So we're involved in the Health and Human Services aspect of that. And finally, we have an FFRDC focused on national cybersecurity. And you can see in the blue box a lot of the different areas of expertise and capabilities that MITRE's community brings to the table.
All right, hey Dan, so there's a sticky little question that sort of just exists out there today where people are struggling to figure out, how do you define innovation? And I know that this is a journey that you have walked extensively. Can you tell me a little bit about your research and how you have come to a definition of innovation?
Absolutely, for sure. So innovation is one of those words that gets used more often than it gets defined. And it gets sort of misused and applied so broadly and oddly that people begin to wonder, does this word even mean anything at all? So I did a little bit of research into that area, and as you can see on this chart, I found a couple academic papers that looked into that question, what is innovation? One of these research papers identified 60 distinct definitions in use in industry, academia, and government, and then in industry. The other identified 41. So somewhere between 41 and 60 different definitions are in use out there. So that's the bad news. The good news is that there are 2 elements that show up in virtually all of these different definitions. I mean, they're all a little bit distinct, but there are 2 common themes that show up in all of them. And as you'll see in the next slide here, those 2 themes really, I think, work as a good definition. So my recommended definition, what I mean when I use the word innovation, is novelty with impact. So most good definitions about innovation have some reference to novelty and some reference to impact. So something new and something that makes a difference, solves a problem, increases value, increases profitability, all that stuff. I'm slightly paraphrasing a definition that was put together by Scott Anthony in his book titled The Little Black Book of Innovation. Terrific book, I highly recommend it. So novelty with impact. I like this definition for a couple of reasons. First, it's short enough to be memorable. It's not hard to remember, novelty with impact. But it's also broad enough to be applicable in a wide range of situations and applications, because novelty can refer to new technologies or new processes, new organizational structures, new communication methods. Any category of doing something different or just something different can fit under that umbrella of novelty. And novelty is the thing that distinguishes an innovative solution from something that's sort of status quo or business as usual. Impact, similarly, can refer to saving time, saving money, increasing profitability, increasing sustainability, maintainability, all of the ilities that go into system design. If we're talking about a military application, it might mean increased lethality or increased survivability. If we're talking about a commercial application, the impact might be increased profitability. And impact is the thing that distinguishes an innovative solution, idea, or product from something that's merely creative. So it's possible to do creativity for creativity's sake. It's just novel, it's just new, but it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't solve a problem. It doesn't make anything better. And that's fine. We like creativity. We like new things. But again, it's possible to do creativity for creativity's sake, which may or may not be worthwhile. But it is impossible to do innovation for innovation's sake, because innovation is something different that makes a difference. You can't, you just cured cancer for the sake of curing cancer, or you solved a problem just for the sake of solving the problem. Yeah, those are worthwhile goals and objectives. And so by defining innovation as novelty with impact, we really help remove that criticism of, you're just doing something new for the sake of being new, or different for the sake of being different. No, we're doing something new that makes a difference. We're going to do something new and novel. But the thing I like best about this definition, aside from the fact that it's short and memorable, it's broad enough to be applied in a lot of different situations, is that it points to two really important questions. What novelty are you trying to introduce? And what impact are you trying to have? If you can answer those two questions, then we can really have a thoughtful, intelligent conversation about innovation. So it removes some of that ambiguity, and it points to really specific, direct, like, go do this. Go answer those two questions. What is the novelty you're trying to introduce? What is the impact you're trying to have? And again, as we wrestle with those questions, as we try to come up with clear consensus answers among our teams, it helps align our activities and helps make sure that what we're doing genuinely is innovative in the sense of being both novel and impactful.
So Dan, I know you've done a lot of research in this area, right?
Yes.
I'm gonna put you on the spot for a minute. Sure. What is one of your favorite innovative stories in terms of what you've seen happening in the DoD that has really just stuck with you in all of the research that you've done?
Oh boy, there's a lot. It's always hard to pick a specific favorite. But my first book was all about rapid innovation principles and practices from a storytelling perspective. I was telling the stories of hero projects where people did this innovation thing. They introduced something different that made a difference. I particularly like the Condor cluster, which sounds like a disgusting piece of candy from a Monty Python sketch. It is actually a supercomputer that was developed by the Air Force Research Lab. They cut the ribbon in December of 2010, so it's been a decade now. But when they cut the ribbon on that, the Condor cluster was the fastest supercomputer in the entire Department of Defense. So it was operating at 500 teraflops, made it about 33rd fastest in the world. And this was a genuinely new capability within that particular sphere. It outperformed every other supercomputer that the DoD had access to. And I mean, the DoD has access to some pretty high-speed machines. But what was particularly impactful about this supercomputer is that it was built for 1/10 the cost of a comparable supercomputer. It used 1/10 the electricity, so it was green. It had a lower carbon footprint, and they made it out of 1,760 PlayStation 3s. Not even the latest and greatest PlayStation. It was last year's model that they were able to buy at a discount, and they built a cluster out of it, and they ran open source software, Linux, as their operating software. So this is a genuinely novel approach to building a supercomputer that was really impactful because it made this supercomputing capability accessible and affordable in places where it hadn't been before. And again, one of the main points of that story is it shows that innovation doesn't have to cost so much, take so long, and be so complicated. we can get world-class, best-in-class new capabilities on a shoestring budget.
Very true. All right, so another thing that comes up frequently, I know this is something that even myself, right? I'm 3 months out of the DoD. Even myself, I've struggled with this as well in terms of if you're going to have innovation, not doing the innovation for innovation's sake, but what is the type of culture that is really necessary to be able to foster a team to be able to tackle that innovative activity or project or item that they're working on?
Yeah. So I think there's two pieces to this question. The first piece is, what is culture in the first place? And then what are some types of cultures? What are some cultural attributes that help foster, that help make up a culture of innovation? So let's start with the first piece. What is culture? In keeping with my preference for short, memorable definitions, my definition of culture is an organization's shared beliefs and behaviors. So when we talk about culture, what is that even? It is our shared beliefs and our shared behaviors. And these two things reinforce each other. Because I believe this, I behave that way. Because I behave that way, it reinforces the particular set of beliefs. So some cultures are just more conducive to innovation than others. So a culture that values creativity, for example, we believe that creativity is important and good. We then behave in creative ways. We explore, we do experiments, we turn creativity into a verb. That is a type of culture that tends to foster innovation. We might believe that diversity and inclusion is a good thing. And then our beliefs put that into practice. We deliberately and strategically build diverse collaborative relationships with people who don't look like us or sound like us or have the same backgrounds as we do. All the different dimensions that go into diversity, ranging from gender, ethnicity, neurodiversity, physical ability, orientation, all these different layers of opportunity for increasing diversity and inclusion. If we believe that that's important, then we would put that into practice in our hiring, in our training, in the way we promote, and in the way we deliberately design our teams. So those are two examples of cultural attributes that when we put them into practice, when we embrace them as elements of our culture, that tend to foster creativity. Others include things like speed, risk-taking, adaptability. I'm a big fan of a trio of cultural attributes: speed, thrift, and simplicity. When we say speed, thrift, and simplicity are good, desirable attributes for our projects, for our processes, that tends to help foster experimentation and creativity, and ultimately novelty that has impact, so innovation. And on the side of the screen there, on that side of the chart, you can see a number of tools and strategies and stories about how do you foster a culture of speed, a culture of acceleration. And we'll touch more on where that website came from and what else you'll find there later on in the presentation, but a little teaser for a topic we're going to hit in a bit. Does that kind of answer the question, Christine? Anything else you want to tackle on that, or any questions from anybody?
That's it for me on my side. Do we have anything from the attendees, Charisse?
No questions as of yet.
All
Okay.
right.
And I would just add one thing, that it's really important to get culture right. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast. The good news is that there are specific steps we can take to build and establish and foster a healthy culture, one that is welcoming and creative and unlocks the talent of the team. And boy, getting that right, a lot of the other things get a lot easier.
Very true.
Thanks, Dan. So now that we've kind of set the foundation for what innovation is and what culture is, let's shift gears to an example of working in the federal government and specific to the Department of Defense. So innovation and the Department of Defense. And I lifted this. I'm sure everyone can read it, right? I don't need to zoom in or anything. This is the DoD innovation ecosystem as seen through the lens of one individual. Clearly, it's like 3-point font. There's a lot of interconnected organizations, industry, academia, government, but really it kind of shows a very complex innovation ecosystem for the DoD. This reminds me of the horse blanket, as we used to refer to the old acquisition. What is it, like 3 by 2, 2 feet by 3 feet, two-sided, that you would use to be able to track the acquisition framework. But what this all really boils down to is this. If you look at the right, fielded capability, in the end, in the Department of Defense, we're trying to drive any kind of development, innovation, sustainment to fielded capability that enables the warfighter to execute the mission. And there are 3 key players, primary sources that we use for acquiring innovation that works its way to the field through government, industry, and academia. And depending on which source, there are various methods to acquire and sustain that capability. So for example, in the government, if we're looking to solve, provide impact, as Dan would say, to an Air Force mission, maybe there's a pre-existing capability that the Navy has. And by using it in a new way, in a novel way, you can bring innovation and provide that capability. So that's one pathway, you know, the government, something that's pre-existing in their hands. Then there's industry. And for those who have engaged with the Department of Defense, we're familiar that in order to get from an industrial innovative solution into the hands of the warfighter, it's through the contractual process. And we'll touch on that here in a little while. And finally, same thing, academia. There's a lot of amazing research going on in our universities. And how do we bring that to the warfighter as well, instead of waiting 10, 20, 30 years for it to over mature? How do we get that into the hands of the warfighter to say, hey, this is great innovation, maybe can you make some changes, can you tweak? So 3 sources to get innovation to the warfighter. Which leads to the question, if that's how we've always been doing it, you know, are there any new statutes or policies for DoD innovation? You know, what is different today than 1993? What enablers are being provided, whether it's from congressional levels, which is statute, so statute is law. So when Congress, you know, releases a new law, a new statute, that is direction that the Department of Defense can in turn take, understand, and convert into policy to allow for effective execution at the joint and service levels. So I'll turn it over to Christina to talk about the newest statute that's come down.
So this one's very exciting. Also one very near and dear to my heart, spending the last several years within software. So what's been really exciting is to watch, not only did Congress come to us and say, you need to develop a software specific pathway. They also came to us and said, if you're really gonna get it right, it's really important that you add in the appropriate training competencies for acquisition, software developers, contracting, finance, etc. I'm pretty sure they left no one out. And so it's been really exciting to see. So this is kind of broken down. The software pathway kind of falls under the Section 800, the NDA Section 800 area. And then when you get really specific into the software training, that is NDA Section 862. And that's really talking to us about getting our software acquisition and management training programs stood up. So basically it's saying how do we ensure that our acquisition teams are able to procure digital services in the 21st century. Making that training relevant and impactful to those who are receiving it. And then the Section 230 is really around standing up it has a really long title here, which is, you know, Chief Digital Engineering Recruitment and Management Officer. We just kind of like to refer to it as a CDO, Chief Digital Officer. And this is really about being able to hire and retain the right type of talent. So they really looked at this from a full spectrum of how do you do it right? How do you train the talent to acquire it and to manage it? and how do you make sure that you get the right types of developers and be able to retain them with the right incentives. So this has been really exciting to watch and really be a part of this unfolding. And I think that there's, if you're watching the ADA site, there's lots of stuff that comes out in this area, but not only this area, but if you move over to the next slide, Deb, also the MTA area, which I'll hand over to you guys to talk through this one.
Thanks, Christina. So really this was the National Defense Authorization Act that really kicked innovation into gear for the Department of Defense for where we are today. So circa 2016, Congress realizes we are lagging. The United States is lagging competitors out there, and it's clear that we have too much bureaucracy in the acquisition processes. It takes forever to define a requirement and get buy-in from everyone, and then turn that into a program, and then there are all of these reviews in the program and all of these steps. And so we're not delivering at the speed of relevance. We're just delivering at the speed of the bureaucracy. So 2016 National Defense Authorization Act comes out and gives additional authority to the Department of Defense for what is called the middle tier of acquisition pathways. And in that wording, it refers to rapid prototyping and rapid fielding. And you can see on the slide, the words rapid in both sections are yellow. So this is not about generic prototyping and what Department of Defense should do with prototyping. It's about rapid prototyping. It's about going faster. It's about rapid fielding faster. And so the authority that was given for rapid prototyping is to use innovative technology. Again, here's that term innovation, to rapidly develop fieldable prototypes to demonstrate new capabilities, meet emerging military needs. To field a prototype demonstrated in an operational environment. And they put a time limit on it. So this is not, something, again, take 10 years and come back to us and let us know. But the rapid prototype needs to be out within 5 years of the requirement. So here we are using innovation to field a new capability, a prototype, not a final project, but something to get into the hands of the warfighter within 5 years so that they can play with it, experience it, and assess it against the threat. Rapid fielding, similar concept. But it's not using innovation, something fresh. It's looking for proven technologies that are out there and saying, how can we scale that? This is great capability. We need to get it to all the bases. We need to upgrade our systems with minimal development. How can we do that? And as long as you begin production within 6 months of the requirement and you can complete the defined fielding within 5 years of the requirement, then Congress says it's okay to use this middle tier of acquisition pathway to do rapid fielding. These two examples, the new software pathway and the middle tier acquisition pathway, these statutes that Congress has given the Department of Defense, really flowed down to the DoD, and they said, wow, we can rewrite, we can throw out all of these old manuals, we can do a hardcore reset. And what you have here from the senior leadership, from Miss Lord's Spotlight newsletter, quote, the DoD 5000 series, which is the policy that comes out of the statutes. The DoD 5000 series rewrite is the most transformational change to acquisition policy in decades. So this is the senior leadership saying, finally, Congress is helping us to bring innovation to the warfighter.
Yeah, so Debbie laid out the sort of the path between new statute, new laws get written, and then that gets translated into new policy, so the updated 5000 series policy. But then the next step down is the actual practices. How do we put policy into practice? And one of the ways the DoD has been doing this is with the new Adaptive Acquisition Framework, the AAF. What you see on the screen here is the diagram that depicts the Adaptive Acquisition Framework. And the basic message of this picture is that there's more than one way to do acquisitions. That's it. That's the idea that we're trying to get across. there is more than one way to do acquisitions. Now, just like the idea that innovation is novelty with impact, when we define it that way, hopefully that triggers some questions. What novelty are we trying to introduce? What impact are we trying to have? This image should also trigger some questions. There's more than one way to do acquisitions. Okay, which way should we use? That's the question we're trying to encourage people to ask and to wrestle with. And we've put together these online interactive digital tools to help program managers and engineers and other people involved in this military technology activity, both from the government side as well as on industry side, to really make an informed decision, informed answers to that question. Which of these pathways should we use? So some of the pathways are pretty easy to identify. The urgent capability acquisition, hey, if you've absolutely positively got to be there in less than 2 years, here's that purple line at the top, a quick way to do it. The middle tier of acquisition pathway is one of the newest pathways. That's the grown in green. It has two sort of sub pathways, one on rapid prototyping, one on rapid fielding, emphasis in both cases on the word rapid. That's what Debbie was mentioning. The third line down, the red one, is kind of the traditional long major capability acquisition. But even that, we're working to streamline, simplify, and accelerate that pathway as well. There's a pathway for software, pathway for defense business systems, and pathway for services, which at least in the Air Force, I believe, is more than 50% of the acquisition money is spent on the acquisition of services. So that's a pretty big chunk of the funds that get spent. So Defense Acquisition University has a website with all of this interactive and clickable. So you click on each box and it will take you to more information about, what do these pathways mean? Why would you pick this one versus that one? You can do side-by-side compare and contrasts. And some really great useful resources there to help people understand the differences between these pathways and why you would pick one over the other. So in parallel with that, the next slide shows the what we call the contracting cone, and you can go to aaf.dau.edu if I didn't mention that URL previously. If the previous chart says there's more than one way to do acquisitions, this chart says, or this image says, there's more than one way to do contracting. And we aim to trigger the same question. Okay, of all these options available to us for all the different ways we can do contracting, how do I pick one? How do I make an intelligent, thoughtful choice to pick the right contracting strategy for the work that I'm trying to do? And again, over at DAU, this is an interactive, clickable online tool. So for each of these wedges in this fan or in this cone, you can get information about what are the pros and cons of each one, what are the opportunities and the restrictions. This includes FAR-based, so the Federal Acquisition Regulation, as well as non-FAR-based. That's the green side of the cone. It's a terrific tool. It's of all the tools that we've helped put together and fielded over at DAU. I think this is the most popular one. It gets the most clicks last I saw on our Google Analytics. But a lot of really great resources there to help us understand the contracting options available to us and pick the right one. Charisse, any questions from you or anybody else on that one?
Yes, I do have 2 questions. Great. When you speak to the resources, are there any case studies available to give people essentially a real world example of how to pick the right choices from an acquisition or contracting standpoint?
Yes, absolutely. So there are a number of kind of case studies as well as some scenarios. We're in the process of updating and writing a whole new set of scenarios that basically walk you through, there I am. I'm going to be leading this type of project. I'm going to use this strategy. This is what that looks like. So these scenarios that we're putting together are sort of loosely based, slightly fictionalized versions of real world projects. We tried to pick technologies that were accurate and contracting strategies that are, contracting and acquisition strategies that are well documented. And we kind of show this is the documentation, this is the contracting, this is how we write the requirements, this is the process for doing all of these. What we try to do with these case studies and scenarios is offer them for illumination, if not imitation. So it doesn't mean go off and look exactly like this, but use it as a light to encourage some critical thinking and as sort of a for instance, as you lay out your own acquisition strategy and your own contracting strategy.
Okay, and a second question. Would you say that the tools are service agnostic from a government standpoint? Just like when we're doing software implementations and people are looking at things that are vendor agnostic from a tool side of the house. But as we look at acquisitions and contracting and how we're actually integrating innovation into those organizations, would you say it's service agnostic?
Service agnostic in the sense of it doesn't matter whether you're Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines. Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. So this is fairly DoD centric. We really focused on the Defense Department's policies and procedures, but it's all provided at the DoD level. So realizing, of course, that the different services have their own acquisition guidebooks and their own acquisition applications of these policies. But yes, these are all available to all the different services. And frankly, I think the non-DoD users could apply some of these basic concepts and principles as well, although they might just have to point to a different document instead of DoD 5002. But the basic practices, I think, are fairly domain agnostic.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
And Dan, would you say as an example, so MTA, middle tier of acquisition, that wasn't developed in a dark room in the back of an OSD office, right? The services were involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the principles here is that good policy lags good practice. So that is, good practice should drive good policy. So developing the middle tier of acquisition policy was very much an iterative process where the DoD says, hey, here is a broad general authority that we're giving to all the services. And Ms. Lord said, okay, services, go off and experiment with this and come back to me in a year. Tell me what worked. Tell me what didn't work. Tell me what we should write down and sort of institutionalize. Tell me what we should change. Tell me what additional training you might need or additional authorities you might need. And then at the end of that year, they collected a bunch of inputs, got actual guidance and feedback from the field, from the practitioners who were doing this work, and used that to incorporate into the updated version of the policy document. I've never seen policy develop that way before. It's refreshing, and I'm really excited with the results so far.
Yeah, and Dan, I'll add on the same thing's true for the software acquisition team that's working.
Mm-hmm.
There's a software working group going on right now, and they are, it's people from all the services. Everyone's involved. Everyone's putting their fingerprint on what things look like. And that is all the way down to the training and the hiring and retention teams. And that's really refreshing and exciting to see. Even people at some of the software factory levels are included in a lot of those calls. And it's pretty inspiring, coming from a day-to-day program manager in the Air Force, to be able to see some of those differences.
Yeah, I feel like such an acquisition nerd to say it's so exciting to see these policies come together this way. But it really is, because what it's doing is it's including and enabling and empowering the people who do the work. And it's listening to their inputs in a way that I think doesn't always happen. The traditional approach to developing policy is, the folks at the Pentagon will write the policy and say, okay, everybody, this is what I'm telling you to do. Just go do what I told you to do. We've flipped that around with these new things. And one thing we're finding is that, middle tier of acquisition, for example, looks a little different in the Air Force than it does in the Army and than it does in the Navy. And that's okay. And that's by design. And similarly, the software acquisition pathway, the way the different services implement it, the way they put it into practice will vary a little bit because the services are different. And so it's not a one size fits all approach. We're really aiming to foster a culture, go back to culture again, a culture of critical thinking, a culture of adaptability, and a culture of focused on execution, on like getting stuff out the door. That's sort of the point of all of this. And that, by definition, sort of requires slightly different applications and slightly different flavors across the different services. And so I think I'm excited to see that happening.
And so this is the strategic level flexibility. This is where DoD has come in at the senior level and recognized, again, Congress has given us these statutes that allow for opportunities to field faster, to field at the speed of relevance. Let's create this overarching. And from there, we start to see it flow down into the no-kidding hands of the acquisition practitioners and the warfighters. And so kind of transitioning to the, the operational and tactical level, i.e. the program offices and engagement with this industry, vendors, non-traditional vendors, you may be hearing of challenge statements. And this is something that is new. This is novel. This is the Department of Defense saying, you know what, these long-winded requirements may be classified, may only go to our traditional, big five industry partners that we've used for the past 30 years. That's not the way to get that innovation into the system. So let's pivot. Let's try doing pitches and leveraging challenge statements. So here's a little bit about what that really means, and the process of the challenge statement. So I like to refer to this as the Christmas tree bar, because it's in the reds and greens. And really, this is the continuum from when on the far left you have a capability gap as a warfighter. You say, wow, I need something that I have a problem, I have a threat, I don't have a capability to defeat that threat. I have an aging system, I don't have a manufacturer to give me another part. I have a problem. And over on the far right, once you go through this process, you've received a new solution and you've applied it. And so back to the left, the capability gap, that could be classified. Not everyone in the world needs to know that somebody's airplane goes faster than our plane, or somebody's ship goes, further down than our ship. But the idea is that there is a specific capability gap that needs to be translated, and it needs to be prioritized. And you need to bring in the stakeholders to understand what is the real capability gap, what is the problem here, what's the scope, what's the so what, the impact, and what kind of flexibility goes in there. So once you understand the gap and you can evaluate it, now you can translate it into something that can be shared with the maximum number of vendors. Again, getting out of that traditional, here's who we've always used, here's how we've always solved. So turning that into an unclassified statement that says, dear industry, we have a problem, we challenge you to find a solution. And then government steps back and allows the innovation from the experts, from the non-traditional vendors, from the academics, to get new solutions. So that's where the challenge statement comes in, and then the responses come in, and those are assessed. Different kinds of engagement models, collaboration with some of these partners, with maybe some cost sharing or finding some funding sources, leveraging that contracting cone, the full suite of contracting methods to as effectively bring on some of these solutions to get that innovation into the hands of the warfighter. And then defining success metrics against those. So, hey, there's this great innovation, looks like a good solution. What does that really mean? How do we evaluate innovation? What kind of risk are we bringing in? Anytime innovation, it means something new. So that means that some kind of change could equal risk. So it needs to be looked at. And then finally, picking some of those vendors, building some of that capability, and then bringing it back into the operational community to a specific need. And again, that could go back into the classified environment. Hey, thank you very much, industry, for this great software solution, this great hardware solution. We're going to go, plug it in at this specific base or this specific mission that doesn't necessarily need to be known. But that's this continuum of the challenge statement to bring in more creativity and to find more innovation. And we're seeing this come out a lot more. I think the Air Force was one of the leaders in the challenge statements and pitch days, and now you're starting to see not just the other services, but this is starting to spread to the other federal agencies as well. I think I saw a call in the healthcare space for something like this. So it's not just Department of Defense. This is federal wide. Specific to MITRE. MITRE has a part of the organization called Bridging Innovation. And so we wanted to share with you how MITRE sees this innovation methodology. This isn't the Department of Defense. This is from our MITRE wheelhouse. I can't speak, none of us can speak on behalf of the DoD here. So we just want to share how MITRE sees it through our lens. And so the idea to bridge innovation is to get that capability from the startup community to sponsors, such as the Department of Defense, or really any of those 7 FFRDCs that we mentioned. So again, for us, it's not just about DoD, but new innovation can go to a myriad of sponsors. And our vision is to leverage the diverse innovation ecosystem and build pathways to enable the pairing, the partnering between industry and academia and the government. One of the successes MITRE has realized is that it's key to embed in key innovation ecosystems across the nation. This is a screenshot of a lot of the different locations where MITRE is. I'm up in the Boston area, so I can point to that box. Techstars, Air Force, MITRE supports that, supports Mass Challenge, Mass Robotics. You go down to DC, there's AFWorks. Florida, there's the Special Forces Works. There's Montgomery, MGM Works, right by you guys, I believe. So it's really all over the map. And again, we find it very helpful to be on site, to be able to engage with the innovation community directly. MITRE has some key pillars to bridging innovation. So, how do I start? What do we do? I'm a startup. How do I get to? Or, hey, I'm government. I want that. How do I get to? We have some phases here where we talk about defining the requirements, figuring out your strategic plan for a transition. If you want to bring in new tech, it's not, hey, just get that for me, but what does that really mean? If you secure innovation, what's the transition? How do you bridge that infamous valley of death? Immersing, so embedding into the regional centers, kind of like I mentioned, by getting that immersive perspective, you get the hands-on. We can have that conversation. I mentioned up front that MITRE is a non-competitor, so there's really no barrier to MITRE talking to startups, to talking to the non-traditional vendors, because MITRE also talks to sponsors. So it's a great opportunity to be able to understand and immerse, which then enables scouting and matching, right? So again, we're 8,500 strong in MITRE. So if our network is seeing opportunities and capability gaps, we can help bridge those, help connect the right teams together. And if it's something that needs some incubation, MITRE believes, put a little skin in the game, help out, because a lot of the startups have the vision, have the opportunity, but just need a little bit of mentorship and guidance to be able to, get subject matter experts or mentors who have experience, deep experience in some of these different domains. And finally, transition what has been incubated and what has been grown, and doing that through streamlined contracting. So on this, I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole and go through all the details here. Feel free to ask questions or reach out to us, but I did want to just show 2 more slides, a little more story on define and transition, just so you can understand this is also what we have with conversation with some of the sponsors. So DoD is also listening to this conversation as well. So if you're an innovator, if you're a vendor who wants to speak to the DoD, this is, use the language that they're using. So when we talk about the defining pillar, that first one, the idea is, again, to come up with a strategic plan, a comprehensive strategic plan for a successful transition. So understanding the capability gap, turning it into a challenge statement, kind of like the Christmas tree bar that I showed you earlier, formulating a rapid transition. This can't sit around forever. It's how do we move forward? How do we help facilitate engagements and funding to rapidly move that capability along? Advising, it's again establishing that evaluation criteria. What does success mean for a potential solution? And then finally, from this overarching comprehensive strategic plan, implement that strategy. So there a lot of planning, and now moving forward with challenge statements and execution. So that's a little bit about kind of defining in this process. And then skipping to the end, the transition aspect. So once a startup or non-traditional vendor has gotten to a point where they have a capability that needs to get into the hands of the warfighter, what are opportunities to rapidly deliver those capabilities? And we talk in terms of streamlined acquisition and contracting pathways. And so making sure that the solution meets evaluation criteria, And then which pathway? So the pathway that Dan outlined, the AAF, the Adaptive Acquisition Pathway, how do we get the solution into the hands of the warfighter? Which pathway makes sense? Is this an urgent need? Is this a rapid prototype? Is it software? And from there, looking at the best contracting pathways. And this is a list of some of the FAR and the non-FAR. And finally, into the hands of the government. So that was kind of setting the stage. So now you kind of understand a little bit about, through the lens of MITRE, I'll say, how the DoD is looking at innovation. So there's the statutes, the policies, the framework, the concepts for challenge statements, the unique opportunities now to bring in innovation in different ways and have a strategic plan and to make sure that we're accelerating that capability. So then there's a new question here. So to Dan, any tools out there to help a team innovate?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes. We're going to take a look at two tools here real quick. Two websites that provide a lot of tools and resources and information that you can use to navigate this thing called defense acquisitions. The first one is ADA. That's an acronym, stands for Acquisition in the Digital Age. ADA has a number of different features and things on the website. I put the URL over in the chat there. One thing of particular note is guidance on how to use the middle tier of acquisition pathway. We've got a lot of resources on there to help people understand what is middle tier of acquisition, how do you put that into practice? Because again, that's one of the newest ones and has a lot of great information about rapid prototyping and rapid fielding. The other thing on there is a collection of, I believe, 30 plus different strategies for acceleration. Strategies that you can use to help your team, your project, deliver capabilities faster. And these strategies range from building a culture of innovation, like you saw on the chart several minutes ago, to how do you write your requirements with speed in mind? How do you write requirements so that things go faster? System design, contracting, and then how do you sort of help run the program office so that things will go faster? And these are great tools and strategies that you can use whether you're on the government side or on industry. Speaking of tools you can use, whether you're on the government side of things or industry, MITRE's Innovation Toolkit is another free resource available to everybody. I put the link to that one in the website or in the chat as well. It's itk.mitre.org. This is a collection of 25 tools, techniques, and methods that you can use to help your team ask good questions and solve hard problems. These tools are delightfully low tech. They're easy to download and use. There's no software you need to download. They're mostly things you'd sort of download and print out as like a PDF and use them as a facilitated decision or facilitated discussion tool to help you do things like frame your problem, understand your user, simplify your design. A lot of these tools come from the human-centered design practice. Some of them are fairly common tools like personas. Again, persona is a tool that you use to help to understand your user. Others are more custom tools like storm draining is a tool we use to help simplify big lists. Kind of after you do a brainstorming, you follow it up with storm draining. And then the third category of tool would be like our version of a tool that's sort of out there in the world, like a pre-mortem is something that a lot of people do. We've got guidance on how to do a really, really effective pre-mortem. So the next slide here shows what we call the double diamond pattern. The double diamond pattern involves using divergent tools to go broad and generate a lot of ideas, followed by convergent tools to simplify, streamline, and integrate. Doing that twice. The first diamond is exploring the problem space. We collect a lot of ideas about what might the problem be. Then we use convergent tools and reductive thinking tools to drill down, to distill down to the problem is this. Now you do the same thing with solutions. Hey, what are all the possible ways we can solve this problem? And then you use convergent thinking to get down to the one or two, the small number of specific solutions you might pursue and implement. Next slide here. So this is a list of all the tools on the Innovation Toolkit. For each of them, there's a description of what is the tool, when would you use it, why would you use it, and then step-by-step, how would you put it into practice, as well as downloadable templates. We have a blog on the website where we provide tool profiles and tips for facilitation and like examples for what do these tools look like in practice. Give me one more click here. And just to kind of help navigate this, help filter this out a little bit, I would suggest that problem framing, Lotus Blossom, and the trees prism would be three really good tools to start with, particularly if you're working on these challenge statements. So that's a good place for, on this big list of 24, 25, maybe start with these three. And I think that's the last of my stuff. Yeah, so how to learn more, itk.mitre.org. You can get access to all of the tools. Again, they're all for free. We're not here to sell it or anything like that. We publish it with a Creative Commons license to make it as easy as possible for people to download it, use it, and share it.
So this is a key question that has come up repeatedly at the different levels in the chain of command. So if you think you have a great idea, if there's innovation that you want to bring into your program, how do you convince a stakeholder to move forward on innovating?
Oh yeah, hey, this is what we call our 3 Ps. We found that when we're trying to introduce change, when we're trying to encourage somebody to try something different in that innovation space, something different that we hope will make a difference, we find that it's helpful to put these 3 Ps on the table: policy, precedents, and partners. So what we try to do is, when we're going to propose, hey, let's try something different, we do the research, you read the regs, the policies, the guidebooks, the memos from senior leaders or other messages that are out there, and you find something that basically says that this is allowable. So if we can say the policy says I can do it, sometimes that's enough to get things moving. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you need to get that second P, a precedent. Hey, here's an instance when it's been done before. So policy says I can do it. Here's an example where it's been done before. Again, we can use that for illumination as well as imitation. And what can we learn from these things, these examples of using this approach that other people have tried? And then the third P is partners, the people who will stand alongside you and do it with you. And we find that if you can put all 3 of those onto the table, policy allows it, it's been done before, here are people who will do it with you, that tends to help reduce the reluctance, reduce the barriers to implementing and exploring and experimenting with whatever this new thing is that you're trying to introduce.
We've had an opportunity, some of us, to visit a lot of the different military installations. And if you have that experience, go into one of the back shops. You'll see the innovation is there. It's not just how do we innovate on the $1 trillion F-35 or the multi-billion-dollar satellite system. There are opportunities at very tactical levels to innovate, and just wanted to leave with Ben Franklin's perspective, where for want of the nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. For the want of a battle, the kingdom was lost, and all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So look for the nail opportunities too, because no innovation is too small. That tactical level solution could be the capability that closes the gap, that keeps the U.S. out in front.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I would just add that the tactical ability to rapidly develop and deliver relevant technologies is itself a strategic capability. And that you do this often enough, you do it incrementally and iteratively, you can genuinely have strategic effects. So yeah, we definitely, don't underestimate the power of that nail. Over to you, Christina.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We just wanted to know if there were any questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to hop online and ask any questions.
I did have one last question before we leave you guys. A lot of what you talked about today, process changes, document changes, also require a good amount of cultural changes. What have been some of your best practices or lessons learned on how you change the culture around doing things like challenge statements and pitches and some of the other items and activities that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So culture change is challenging. Culture takes time. I often say that culture is more patina than paint. It needs to sort of develop for it to be genuine and organic. Having said that, there are some ways to help shift the culture. And first is by recognizing that the culture we're trying to create probably exists somewhere. So find those pockets of creamy goodness, find those instances where the desirable culture already exists. Seek, support, and celebrate that. find those pockets and say, this is what right looks like. This is us at our best. And then amplify it and do more of that. That way we're not trying to come in and say, hey, everybody, I'm going to change your culture. Yeah, nobody likes that. Instead, we come in and say, hey, everybody, you know what the best, healthiest, strongest culture around in our company is? It's right here. Come be part of that. It's an invitational posture rather than a, you're wrong, you're broken, let me change you and fix you. And we're not introducing some sort of foreign concept that's never been done here before, because that tends to trigger the corporate immune response, and then people really resist. But instead, if we say, look, we want a culture of speed, risk-taking, adaptability, diversity and inclusion, grace and respect. That's the culture MITRE is trying to really foot stomp and establish. We begin by saying, and this is who we are when we are at our best. There's also, we find different people get convinced by different things. Some people want to see the data. Oh, this culture shift is going to make things better and you can prove it with data. Wonderful. Others want to hear stories. Others want to hear examples. Others want to be invited. Others want to know, hey, has this been tried before? Do we have some precedents we can follow? Others want to know, hey, is this consistent with policy? Will the policy allow this type of culture? And again, that gets back to that idea of the 3 Ps. And then there's practices and other things that go into that. So one of the tools in the innovation toolkit is something called the culture change canvas. And it lays out the process for documenting a culture change strategy in very particular, very specific ways. And again, it's challenging, takes some time, takes some effort. I say it's effortful more than hard, because it's doable, but it's effortful, and you got to commit to it and put in the work, but definitely possible.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, once again, I'd like to thank the entire MITRE team for today's session. This session was extremely timely, given the many upcoming opportunities that are on the horizon within not only our local, state, and federal government organizations. I hope you'll join us for the rest of our webinar series each Wednesday at noon Central Time. Next week, we'll actually discuss machine learning and artificial intelligence. Registration is still available at montgomerychamber.com/events. Thank you, MITRE. Thank you to our participants that joined in today. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great week. Stay safe.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thanks for inviting.